Shalom, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, and welcome to Faith to Faith. No matter what our differences may be, it is our faith that brings us together to do great things. My guest today is a distinguished Orthodox Jewish scholar who had a powerful impact nationally and internationally, spreading Torah throughout the world. Rabbi Menachem Genack has served as rabbinic administrator of the Union's Kosher Division since 1980, overseeing the certification program for some 7,000 food production facilities in 80 countries around the world. He is the rabbi of Congregation Shomrei Emunah in Englewood, New Jersey, and gives a Yoredea Shir for ordination students at Yeshiva University. As a friend of President Clinton, he has traveled with him to Israel several times. The two have maintained a fascinating and ongoing correspondence about the Bible. Rabbi Genack authored a book based on that correspondence called Letters to President Clinton, Biblical Lessons on Faith and Leadership. I'd like to welcome Rabbi Menachem Genack, who holds the unofficial title, Bill Clinton's Rabbi. Rabbi, nice to have you with us today.
Good to be with you.
So the question you're asked, I'm sure repeatedly, how does a rabbi and a president develop that kind of relationship? How did this all happen?
Well, it actually began when Bill Clinton and Governor Clinton was a candidate for president, and there was an event for him in Jersey, and I introduced him. And if you recall, at the time, Time magazine had a spread about President Bush, George Bush I, and about what he would call, his problem with the vision thing. And in my remarks, I said that the Bible states that vision is an essential ingredient of leadership, and the Bible says that where there is no vision, the people perish. So Clinton liked the remarks, and he said, you know what? I think I'm going to use that in my acceptance speech, because when I had introduced him, he had just sort of clinched the nomination. It was clear that he was going to get the nomination. I'm going to use that in my acceptance speech at the convention. So I wasn't sure, what's going to happen. He sent me tickets to the convention, and if you'll recall, that phrase became the rhetorical pivot of his speech. He'd say, President Bush mocks us by saying, well, there is, about this vision thing, but vision is an essential ingredient of leadership, as Scripture tells us. And then he would come back to it, and he'd speak, and then he said, but Scripture tells us, where there is no vision, the people perish. And then when he started to campaign with Al Gore, there would be signs with that, that verse from Mishlei.
Did anybody give you credit for this, or, sometimes rabbis or preachers are guilty of not giving attribution when necessary. Did he mention you?
At the acceptance speech? Look at that. But if you remember, he began the speech with people had written his political epitaph 4 years earlier when he gave the keynote address, and it went too long. So he began his speech. Now, as the candidate, he said, I always wanted to finish that speech I started 4 years ago.
Let me ask you, here we are in America. My parents be looking down and saying, gee, our son has a relationship with the cardinal, an Orthodox rabbi has a relationship with the president. Who would have thought years ago that we'd ever see things that we never expected to see? It really demonstrates to us in the best possible way how blessed we are to be living in this kind of country.
Well, I think we can only say only in America. There's a book that just came out, a wonderful book by Sarna and Chappelle. It's just about to come out, called Lincoln and the Jews. Right. And so this goes back, Lincoln, the close relationship that he had with Jews. And there weren't that many Jews in the country. There were about 150,000. And one of them, Jonas, played an important role in the Republican Party at the time and Lincoln's ascendancy. But his openness and civility, of course, that's what marks Lincoln for who Lincoln is. But it goes back even to George Washington and his letter to the Newport Synagogue. So that's very much part of what America is.
I remember there was a rabbi, Harry Halpern, years ago. You may have heard of him. He was at the East Midwood Jewish Center in Brooklyn. And he was not very tall. And someone said to him one day, does it bother you to be considered short? And he said, sometimes I feel like a dime surrounded by nickels. That just because you're smaller doesn't mean you're worth less. On the contrary, sometimes smaller can be worth more. And I think that here the Jewish people, we're 1/10 of 1% of the world's population. We define the world as Jews and non-Jews. But think of all of the, the contributions we've made as a people. And it should make us proud of who we are. You know, we're not perfect, no one is, but there's much we've done. And I think people look to the Jewish people and say, we want to hear your point of view, we want to hear the Jewish voice. I think you point out one of the articles that you wrote there, that there is a Jewish voice that needs to be heard as well.
Well, you know, the interesting this correspondence, which goes on to this day, has been going on for almost 20 years. Actually, it's over 20 years now. And Bill Clinton this speaks a lot about Clinton himself, you know, the openness for different traditions. After all, he's a Southern Baptist. The other thing that people will learn from this is his familiarity with the Bible. Yeah. That may be part of his Southern Baptist upbringing, but he, you know, I once sent him a letter. It was one of my early ones. It was called Judah and Joseph. The theme of the letter was, why was Judah, it was a little present because it was before the Lewinsky story, it was in his first term, why was Judah chosen to be the progenitor of the Davidic dynasty of kingship? After all, one would have thought that Joseph was much more suitable. He ruled in Egypt so brilliantly, saved the nation from famine. He's perfect in every respect, never gives into temptation. So I once heard Rabbi Soloveitchik said that the word Judah in Hebrew, Yehuda, means not only to thank, which is his mother Leah thanks God for her fourth son, but also means to admit. And as Judah, Yehuda is able to lahodot, to admit a mistake, which was the case of Tamar. My daughter typed this, and so I said, what were you looking for in a president and a leader is not perfection, but the ability not to be wedded to a disastrous course, to admit a mistake, to change, to be flexible. And so he wrote me back a note. By the way, I went back to the source. My daughter had typed it in. There was a typo, Genesis 28. I went back to the source. It's Genesis 38.
That shows you his appreciation of the Bible. What about, here you are in a congregation. I'm sure your congregation is comprised of people with different points of view.
We let Republicans in as well.
So what is it, you know, do people look at you and say, well, he's a Clinton rabbi, therefore, you know, he subscribes to the following, we disagree with that. Does that relationship get you into any kinds of conflicts with congregants?
Well, first of all, I make a point never to speak, you know, about a contentious political issue from the pulpit in terms of endorsing this candidate or that candidate. I leave that for Kiddush. But, you know, sometimes we'll agree or disagree, and I don't necessarily vote, you know, I'm not the standard Democrat vote down the line, but I've always was impressed with Bill Clinton, his generosity of spirit, and obviously his extraordinary intelligence. So I'm a big fan.
I remember, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you some time ago, but I remember going to a gathering, and somebody had raised the issue about his background, stories that he heard about him. And the person said to him, how do we know that we can trust you? How do we know we can believe in you? You're running, this is when he was still governor, running for president. And Clinton turned to the person and said, you know, if all I knew about Israel is what I read on the front pages or, you know, the early pages of the paper, how much do I really know about Israel? And it was such a disarming response. And I said, what a mind this person has. And there is great intellectual depth there. This is not someone who's superficial, you know, so correcting a source is something that, you know, you would expect from someone with his grasp of knowledge. He'll go back to the source. Are you quoting this properly? It's a great talent to have that kind of capacity to learn and to learn more. Why did this relationship continue? Sometimes, you know, you write something to a person, a leader, and you get a response, and that's the end of the relationship. How is it able to continue all these years?
Well, actually, it does continue to this very day, and there are about 100 letters that I published of, you know, the correspondence that we had. First of all, you know, the Bible was something that was interesting to them, obviously. You know, and it's not unique to Clinton. The other president that we think about, who was, you know, was very knowledgeable about the Bible, and the Bible it finds itself in many of his speeches, is Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln himself wasn't formally a religious man. As a matter of fact, his wife, Mary Todd, said that he really wasn't a Christian. And in his early years, he wrote he had written a book or an essay which a friend of his, Miller, made sure to burn. This was, I think, in 1820. He said, if you publish this, you'll never be elected president. It was sort of like almost an agnostic book. But obviously, as he grew, he became not formally religious in terms of going to church all the time, which he was criticized in his first run for the House. But he believed in God very deeply, and that how he ran the world, and it's something that we have to relate to, and it's especially demonstrated in the most famous American speech, if not the most famous, the greatest American speech, his second inaugural. God has his own purposes. And I think that's what I saw about Clinton also. It wasn't a denominational link. It was much more, a spiritual link to the Bible and to the prose. And I think he looks to it. He writes in his memoirs, during the difficult times of his presidency, he would read the Bible often. Lincoln did that as well during the difficult times of the Civil War.
Do you think we do a disservice to the word religion or religious, that we always tend to think of people, often tend to think of people who are religious as ones who go to services, and we stress their worship, or we stress their adherence to certain ritual laws. They're religious, right? They're Sabbath observers, they're kosher, but there's more to it. And do you think sometimes we don't really do enough in terms of broadening, that spectrum of what religiosity means?
Well, obviously, there's a spiritual dimension, an ethical dimension, which hopefully the ritual comes to accentuate, to concretize. But if you have one without the other, so it's empty.
I mean, you think of Abraham, ethical monotheism, right? He embodied both. And I think, looking at you as I've known you over the years, you've always been very involved in different spheres. And you can't just be religious by being by half of the equation. There has to be the ethics, the morals. There has to be the ritual. Everything comes together to make the whole. I'm looking also at the other work you do. We'll get back to the Clinton because I think it's a fascinating story there. You work at the OU. Talk about the OU. People, they see it, they may not know what it fully represents.
Well, the OU, I'm the CEO of the OU Kosher Division, which certifies products as kosher around the globe. And the reason it's around the globe, it's actually changed during my term at the OU because the economy changed, became a global economy, so it's not enough just to certify products here in the United States. You've got to go to Tibet, to the ends of the world to check on ingredients. And so you'll see that ubiquitous OU symbol, which certifies that we've checked it and we know that it's a kosher product.
I think it's very nice that, people, you walk into stores where you wouldn't even expect to see kosher products, and all of a sudden you walk over and you say, wow, they carry a whole line that has the OU symbol.
Right. Well, and so that's the great thing about the OU. It makes it easy really to keep kosher in America, except for certain ingredients, or certain products that are unique, meats or wine or cheese. But you can go into almost any supermarket in the United States and find, OU products to keep going at the same cost as any other.
Yeah, but then there are people who are not very knowledgeable when it comes to certification. And they see the word kosher. And they think, okay, as long as it says kosher, I'm all right. And then other people will say, wait a minute, that's not good enough. Someone or some organization has to stand behind, that kind of endorsement. And I think sometimes people are misled because they don't understand fully what kashrut standards are, and anything and everything convinces them.
Well, there are lots of different symbols, in terms of the kosher arena, so they really do have to know who's the person or the organization standing behind it to see how credible it is.
In order to be a person who supervises kashrut, talk about, if I had a job description, what would be required? What does that person have to be, have to know?
Well, when we hire somebody to work for the OU in terms of inspecting plants, we train them. So they have to, first of all, they have to know something about ingredients, food technology. They have to be alert to check, that the labels in the plant have symbols that are appropriate, that the things that in plant that are not, that everything that has our symbol, for example, is something that's supposed to. And most of the plants that are under the OU, we try to have them that everything in the plant is kosher, but that's not always the case. And some plants have kosher, non-kosher in the same plant. Will therefore sometimes require that to be mashgiach and inspected there all the time. So he's got to know a little bit about food technology, and he's also have to be alert in terms of making the inspection.
Yeah. I mean, something is either kosher or it's not kosher. You can't be partially kosher. You know, I remember hearing years ago the phrase kosher style, you know, which meant I think the product may have been kosher, but it was prepared in a non-kosher fashion using, you know, utensils that weren't kosher, and many people railed against that. So it's easy to be misled.
Right. There's, you know, the interesting thing about the OU, you know, the market for kosher products is much broader than Jews who are interested in, you know, for ritual reasons kosher. People are looking for it because some people are lactose intolerant. They want to know whether it has a dairy ingredient in it. They may have religious reasons that and requirements that somehow dovetail with kosher. For example, halal of Muslims or the Seventh-day Adventists. Or they may think that it's whether correct or not, you know, higher standard in terms of quality. So the market of people who are looking for kosher, or at least for the OU symbol, is much broader than just...
Have you ever found any breakdown, you know, numbers, percentage, Jews versus non-Jews who buy kosher products?
You know, I don't have it really an exact percentage, but we know, and you know, Menachem Lubinsky has a marketing, and he has some of these statistics, but there's a significant number of people who are not even Jewish who are looking for kosher products.
Yeah, I'm always amazed by the emerging young audience for kosher today. Young people who are very successful in their professional, arena, and yet at the same time they'll go out, have lunches with people, but they want to maintain that kosher standard. It's something that, you know, they don't say, I'm just going to be kosher at home, I want to be kosher wherever I am. You find that also something that is developing today, a larger, younger audience?
What I've seen is there's a tremendous bifurcation. You're right, there is in terms of younger, successful, families that are very, very committed to kosher, very, very insistent on very high standards. But what we also find, unfortunately, is, you know, the average American Jew, you know, he comes to kosher when it comes to Passover. And when I was growing up, let's say in the 1950s, the average American Jew had a much greater commitment to kosher. Many of them had, you know, 2 sets of dishes. They didn't necessarily keep kosher always outside the house, only in the house. But there was, for the broader range, in other words, you know, what Rabbi Wein, my predecessor, used to say is what we find now much more shmura matzah than we had when we were growing up, but less, you know, regular matzah.
Why kosher? You must get this question often. They understand the rules. Many people read about the rules, but the bigger picture, why must I be kosher? You know, what is it about kashrut that impacts upon my behavior that's so important that it must be maintained?
Well, first of all, it must be maintained because it's a divine rule. So and beyond that, it's interesting. Maimonides, in his great work, his magnum, the Yad HaChazaka, Mishnah Torah, in one of his 14 books is called Kedusha, Holiness. And in that book, in that volume, what he includes is the laws of kashrus, amongst other things. Because the discipline, even in the most mundane things that we do, namely eating, that's where you find holiness. It's not in the most esoteric things. It's in the simple things that we do, that we recognize God's involvement, pronouncing a bracha before we eat something. That's where we see the divine presence. And also, those people who keep kosher, you know, it's a way culturally and religiously to always identify themselves as Jews.
Yeah, I was talking with someone once about kashrut, and I said, it gives you an opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to eat this. This is not, you know, in accordance with my tradition. It does reinforce that sense of discipline. And in life, you have to learn when to say no. You know, you look at the Decalogue, the commandments, and 6 out of 10 are in the negative. That maybe no is one of the most critical answers in life. You mentioned before Joseph, you know, not succumbing to temptation. how sad it is when we see political leaders who sadly don't say no when they should. And I think that kashrut is not recognized by some as being that important. They think, I can do, what difference does it make what I eat? Because they don't really fully understand the rationale behind it. Although the Bible doesn't give a reason. It simply says, be holy, no?
Well, actually, the laws of kashrus are, there are Leviticus, and many of them, at least the biblical laws, are spread out and very explicit. What you're allowed to eat, which animals you're allowed to eat, which fish you're allowed to eat. So it plays an important role just in terms of the law itself. It's not just rabbinic.
It doesn't say do this because you're holy or be
well,
holy, and
it does say
explanation as what that really means.
Well, right. I mean, in general, the Bible usually doesn't give reasons. We do it not because there's a particular reason. God's will is self-justifying. He doesn't have to give a reason. And it's dangerous if you do something because there's a reason, because then you'll begin analyzing, well, what's the reason? And you'll...
So what about those who say, well, Rabbi, I know why I keep kosher. It's healthier, right? It's got to do with health. People develop trichinosis when they have pork. Yeah.
So, so that's not the reason. There are spiritual reasons. It's not necessarily, kosher corned beef and non-kosher corned beef, it's the same risk in terms of fat and cholesterol and so on. So it's not necessarily, or it's not at all a health-related, it's not meant to be a hygiene book. It's something way beyond that.
So you're also, in the many yarmulkes you wear, you teach those who are contemplating ordination, right? Do you find fewer people want to go into the pulpit, want to go into other areas, or do you find it's remained more or less the same, that people still want to go, into that public place known as the pulpit, the synagogue?
Well, I think there are a lot of candidates for ordination, for smicha, who are interested in going into the rabbinate. Many of them are interested in education. Some of them are going for smicha just because they're interested in the studying. They're later on going to go to graduate school, to law school, or to business. So they also, I think, at least at Yeshiva University, and also I teach at Turo, they're very well trained, and there's much more focus in terms of giving them the skills that they need, both in terms of Jewish law, but also the skills they need in terms of rhetorical experiences, pastoral skills, teaching.
How do you find time for it all? I'm listening to you, and here you are, you're teaching, you're in the congregation, you're at the OU. I mean, I always find you, by the way. No matter when I call, I always am able to find you. But you do so many things. How do you find time? How is Rabbi Genack able to sit back and say, I want to study, I want to learn, I want to do something that I'm passionate about, not just working?
Right. Well, I think that's not just my dilemma, that's everybody's dilemma. They have to make sure to try to carve out time for, especially for what you mentioned, for studying, for reading, for learning, and, giving a shiur is an opportunity to do that because you prepare, or if you're doing writing, gives me an opportunity. I mean, one of the things I started at the OU, we have a publishing house called OU Press, and one of the things we focus on especially is Rabbi Soloveitchik's works, both in his halachic works, in terms of publishing them, and also his, his machshava, his philosophy. We just published a commentary on Chumash beginning through the OU Press. So just working on those things gives you also time to focus on it.
You were a great, not only a student, I did a little bit of background check on you. You were a great student of Rabbi Soloveitchik. You enjoyed a closeness with him over the years.
Well, I was actually pretty close to him, and was in the yeshiva for many years, over 10 years. He was just the most remarkable person. It wasn't only that he was a stunning genius, which he was, but he had all these others. He was also quite frightening when you're in the class. He mellowed a little bit in later years, but very, very demanding, man of extraordinary integrity, but and very committed and passionate about teaching and passing on the Masorah, that the tradition continue. An unrivaled eloquence and insight. He was really very, very special.
Well, I'm sure looking down, he's very proud of all that you've done and how you've taken that learning, and he was the best of the best, and you've been able to concretize it in your own world. So you're proud of him, but I'm sure he'd be very proud of you as well. Let me just say this. I think there's a lesson, book Letters to President Clinton. You know, our parents tell us in America, you can grow up and be president. Well, you know, it's nice to say, I'm not sure it's always doable, but you can be a president's rabbi, and the president doesn't have to be Jewish. And how inspirational is that to people? That if you feel proud of who you are, share it with somebody else. It doesn't matter what the title is. Here you are, you wrote a note to a president, and look at where it brought you to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Remember, we may have different faiths, we may have different faces, but above all, we must see each other as members of one human family. A great Jewish sage said, if you believe it can be broken, then know it can also be fixed. When we speak faith to faith, we know we can find the right way to fix the problems of our world. Thank you for watching Faith to Faith, the place that leads to greater understanding. The New York Board of Rabbis would like to thank Marilyn and Martin Metz for their generous support. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik. Thank you for watching Faith to Faith on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.